Revenge is a silver blade, cold to the touch and perfectly balanced for the moment of final impact. Follow the calculated journey of a soul who waited in the shadows to reclaim the justice that was stolen away. Subscribe now and watch the scales of fate finally balance out.
I got the call on a Tuesday morning while I was sitting in the waiting room at the VA clinic, waiting for my annual checkup. My son-in-law's name lit up my screen, which was unusual. My son-in-law didn't call me. We exchanged maybe 20 words a month, most of them at the dinner table when my daughter made us sit together like we were two boys who needed supervision. I let it go to voicemail. He called again before I even put the phone back in my pocket. I stepped outside into the parking lot, the October air sharp and clean, and picked up. "Hey, Frank," he said. He always called me Frank, never Dad, never Sir. Just Frank, like we were coworkers who occasionally shared a refrigerator. "Listen, we've got a situation at the house." "What kind of situation?" "Dorothy needs to talk to you when you get back. It's better if she explains it." My daughter's name in his mouth sounded careful. Practiced. "Put her on," I said. "She's at work. Just come home soon, okay?" He hung up. I sat through the rest of my appointment without hearing much of what the doctor said. 31 years in the Army Corps of Engineers teaches you to recognize when someone is buying time. My son-in-law was buying time, and my daughter was letting him. Neither of those things made me feel good about what I was driving home to. My house is a 4-bedroom colonial on Brentwood Drive in Clarksville, Tennessee. I bought it in 1994 when my wife Carol was pregnant with Dorothy, paid it off in 2019 after 31 years of steady payments and never once missing a due date. Carol had picked out the kitchen tile herself, a pale blue she called Morning Sky. After she passed from a stroke 4 years ago, I kept those tiles exactly as they were. Some mornings, I just stood at the sink longer than I needed to, looking at them. My daughter and my son-in-law had moved in 18 months ago. The story was that they were saving for a house of their own. My son-in-law worked in commercial HVAC, decent money, and my daughter managed the billing department at a regional hospital. Between the two of them, they pulled in somewhere north of $120,000 a year. I didn't charge them rent. I didn't ask for anything toward utilities or groceries. I told them to save everything they could and get on their feet. That was 18 months ago. As far as I could tell, there was no house being saved for and no feet being gotten onto. I pulled into my driveway at noon and knew immediately that something was wrong. There was an unfamiliar sedan parked where I usually parked, a newer model Nissan with Ohio plates. I pulled around to the side, which was my own driveway, and sat in my truck for a moment, looking at that car. When I walked through the front door, I heard voices upstairs. My daughter came down the steps fast, like she'd been watching for my headlights. "Dad, before you go up there, I need to explain something." "Explain it." She twisted her wedding ring the same way she used to twist the zipper on her backpack when she was in middle school and had done something she needed to confess. "My mother-in-law is here. She drove down from Columbus. She's had some health problems and she needed somewhere stable to stay while she recovers." I waited. "She's in the guest room," Dorothy said. "That's my office," I said. "I know, but where's my desk?" "We moved it to the garage." "Just temporarily, Dad. She can't do stairs very well. And the guest room is right next to the downstairs bathroom. And it just made the most sense. You moved my belongings into the garage without asking me. We tried to be careful with everything. Without asking me," I said again. My son-in-law appeared at the top of the stairs. He had the look of a man who had decided in advance that he was in the right and had arranged his face accordingly. "Frank, my mom has been through a lot. She just had knee surgery, and she needs help. We couldn't afford a rehab facility. And she couldn't stay alone in her apartment." "Why not?" "What? Why couldn't she stay in her apartment? People recover from knee surgery in their own homes every day. She lives alone. Someone needs to be with her. Then one of you should have gone to Columbus, or hired a home aide, or at minimum, asked me before moving someone into my house and putting my property in the garage." The door to my office to the guest room opened a crack. A woman I'd met twice at holiday dinners looked out, wrapped in a housecoat, looking uncomfortable. I didn't blame her. She'd been brought into a situation under what I suspected were incomplete terms. "I'm sorry to put you out," she said carefully. "You haven't put me out," I said. "You were brought here under circumstances I wasn't consulted about. That's not your fault." I turned and walked back to my truck. I sat there with my hands on the wheel for a good 5 minutes. Then I pulled out my phone and called my old friend Walter Briggs, who had been an estate attorney in Nashville for 30 years and still owed me a favor from a situation involving a fishing boat and a broken trailer hitch that I will not go into here. "Walt, I need to know what my rights are in my own home." I told him the situation. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I'd always liked about him. "You own the home outright?" he said. "No one else on the deed?" "Just me." "Then it's straightforward. They're licensees, not tenants. Since no lease exists and no rent changes hands, you can revoke permission to occupy with 30 days' notice. Same goes for the mother-in-law, except she was never given permission to begin with. So that's trespassing by the book." "What about the desk in the garage?" Walt was quiet for a moment. "That's conversion of personal property. Moving someone's belongings without consent onto different premises. Technically actionable. I'm not interested in suing my daughter. I know. I'm just telling you what the law says so you understand your position. Frank, you're not the one who needs to be careful here." "They are." I thanked him and drove to a Home Depot. I bought new deadbolts for the front door, the back door, and the door to my bedroom. I'd been meaning to update them anyway since Carol passed. She'd always said the locks were too simple. She'd been right about most things. When I got back, my daughter was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded like a woman waiting for a verdict. My son-in-law was somewhere upstairs. I set the bag down on the counter. "I'm changing the locks today," I said. "You'll get a key. Your husband will get a key. There will be no key for your mother-in-law. She's a guest in my home. And the terms of that will need to be discussed." "Dad, she just had surgery." "I know she had surgery. That doesn't change the fact that I came home to find my office emptied and a stranger in my house with no conversation having taken place. We knew you'd say no." I stopped. "That's why you didn't ask," I said slowly. "Not because you forgot. Not because it was an emergency, and there wasn't time. You knew I'd say no, so you just did it, and presented it as a done deal." Dorothy looked at her hands. "How long does she plan to stay?" I said. "A few months. Until she's mobile enough to manage on her own." "And what exactly were the two of you planning to contribute to that arrangement?" "Food, utilities, care. We'll help take care of her." "I mean money, Dorothy." "What were the two of you planning to contribute financially to running this household with an additional person in it?" She didn't answer. That was when I understood the full shape of what was happening. It wasn't just the desk in the garage and a woman I barely knew sleeping in my office. It was the pattern of the whole 18 months suddenly coming into focus. Two people with combined income that could comfortably support a household of 4, living in my home, contributing nothing, and now expanding the arrangement at my expense, as if the house were a resource to be deployed however they saw fit. I installed the new deadbolts myself. It took about 40 minutes. My son-in-law watched from the hallway at one point and didn't say anything. His mother stayed in the room, and I could hear the television through the door. My daughter made pasta for dinner and asked me twice if I wanted some. I said no both times. That night I called my son, Thomas, who lived in Raleigh and had his own house and his own life and had never asked me for a single thing after he turned 22. We weren't the type of family that talked every week, but when we talked, it was real. "She said they knew you'd say no." Thomas repeated back to me. "That's what she said." "Dad." He paused. "I don't want to get in the middle of this. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you what's happening. Has Dorothy said anything about when they're planning to actually buy that house they keep mentioning?" "No." "Have you looked at what they're actually doing with their money?" I hadn't. It occurred to me now that I hadn't because I'd trusted her. She was my daughter. Carol would have said the same thing. "We raised her right, Frank. She'll figure it out." Carol had given everyone more grace than they'd earned, and I had loved that about her, and I had apparently inherited the habit without the discernment. The next morning I asked Dorothy directly, I want to see your savings account. What you've put aside toward a house. Dad, that's private. You are living in my home for free. Your husband is living in my home for free. You're now housing a third person in my home without my permission. I think I've earned the right to ask where the money is going. She looked at my son-in-law, who was at the counter pouring coffee. He shrugged like it was her problem to handle. We've been paying off some debt, she said finally. What kind of debt? Another pause. His truck. Some credit cards. We did a kitchen renovation at a what? At a house we were renting before we moved here. We upgraded the kitchen because we thought we'd be there longer, and then our landlord decided to sell and we had to move. You renovated a rental property, put that money into the landlord's equity, and then moved in with me. It wasn't that simple. How much credit card debt? She told me. The number was high enough that I had to take a breath. I excused myself, went to my bedroom, and sat on the edge of Carol's side of the bed, where I still didn't sleep. I looked at her photo on the nightstand. She was laughing at something off camera, the way she always laughed, with her whole face. I thought about the last conversation we'd had about Dorothy, 2 weeks before the stroke, when Carol had mentioned quietly that she worried our daughter had a hard time with money. Not bad with money the way young people are. More like she didn't see consequences until they had already arrived. I'd said she'd figure it out. Carol hadn't pushed it. And now here we were. I went back to the kitchen and sat down across from my daughter. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I want you and your husband to sit down with a real number. What you make, what you owe, what you need to do to get out of debt and into your own place. You have 1 month to show me that plan, a written plan with numbers. Dad, because right now what I see is 2 working adults who have been living here for 18 months, putting nothing aside, bringing your financial decisions into my retirement, and now expanding the situation without asking me. I love you, but love doesn't mean I finance the rest of your adult life. My son-in-law set down his mug. No offense, Frank, but you're not exactly hurting. The house is paid off, you've got your pension. The question of what I have is not relevant to the question of what you owe. We'll pay you back for everything. You've said that before. He had nothing to add to that. The month that followed was uneasy. His mother stayed, which I'd agreed to temporarily with the condition that they paid me $600 a month to offset costs, which they did, the first time they'd paid for anything since moving in. I noticed she was a perfectly decent woman who was embarrassed by the situation more than she let on. We had coffee once or twice. She apologized again. I told her again, it wasn't her fault. Dorothy and I had dinner together on a Thursday. Just the 2 of us. And for a little while it felt like it used to when she was in her 20s and we'd go for burgers and talk about things that mattered. She asked me about the Corps, about old projects, about what I thought about the flood control work being done on the Cumberland. She talked about her job. It was a good dinner. I let myself believe we were making progress. Then I got a call from my brother's wife. My brother Dennis lived in Atlanta. We talked every few weeks and saw each other 3 or 4 times a year, holidays and the occasional long weekend. He'd had a cardiac event in August. Nothing fatal, but enough to rattle everyone and enough to require some monitoring. I'd gone down for a week to help out and had called Dorothy every day from his guest room. Frank, my sister-in-law said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me about whether it bothers you. Go ahead, Patrice. Has Dorothy said anything to you about Dennis's situation? About the house? Or what might happen to it someday? I didn't understand the question at first. What do you mean? A few weeks ago, Dorothy called Dennis. This was right around when she knew you were coming to visit. She told him she wanted to check in on him. They talked for a while, and she asked him some questions about whether he had a will, about whether the house was in both our names, about what his plans were. I was quiet. Dennis thought it was sweet at first, that she was worried about family, but it kept coming back to the property questions, and eventually he felt strange about it, and told me. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make trouble. Patrice paused. But after what you told Dennis about the situation with the desk and his mother-in-law, I thought you should know. My daughter had called my brother, who was recovering from a cardiac event, and asked him about his estate plans. While I was sitting in his guest room helping his wife manage his medications and driving him to follow-up appointments, she had called to inquire about his assets. I thanked Patrice and sat with that information for 2 days. I didn't eat much. I slept poorly. I went through every conversation Dorothy and I had in recent memory and held each one up to a different light. Then I called Walter again. I want to update my estate documents, I said. How do you want to update them? I want to know what my current beneficiary designations look like, and I want to revisit all of them. We met in his office on a Friday. I brought my financial documents, my insurance policies, and the deed to the house. Walt laid everything out on the conference table, and we went through it all. Dorothy was listed as sole beneficiary on my life insurance, my pension survivor benefit, and my brokerage account. She was the named executor of my will, which I'd written 6 years ago and not reviewed since. How do you want to structure it? Walt said. Thomas gets the house. My brother Dennis and his wife get the life insurance. Or if they predecease me, their kids. Dorothy gets nothing until she demonstrates something. I'll tell her directly. You want to put conditions in the will? No conditions in the documents. I'll handle the conversation separately. But the documents should reflect my actual intentions, not assumptions I made when my wife was still alive, and I had a different picture of who my daughter was becoming. Walt nodded slowly. This is your right, Frank. I'll draw it up. I know it's my right. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking you to draft it correctly. We signed the new documents on a Monday. Thomas got a call from me that evening. I told him what I'd done and why. He was quiet for a long time. Have you told Dorothy? He said. Not yet. She's going to be upset. Probably. Dad, is there any part of this that you might be making permanent because you're angry about something temporary? I thought about that. Thomas had always been the one who asked the harder questions, even as a kid. Carol used to say he got it from her side of the family, which I'd always thought was partly true and partly her way of not crediting me for the things she liked in our children. I asked myself the same thing. I said, here's what I know. Carol has been gone for 4 years. In those 4 years, Dorothy has been here 18 months, during which the house has cost me more in utilities and groceries than it ever did when it was just me. She has not saved meaningfully toward a home. She renovated a rental she didn't own. She is now housing her mother-in-law in my office without asking. And while I was sitting with your uncle after his heart attack, she was calling him to ask about his property. I paused. The estate change doesn't have to be permanent. If things change, the documents can change. Right now, the documents need to reflect reality. Okay, Thomas said. I hear you. I talked to Dorothy the following Saturday morning. My son-in-law was at work. His mother was at a physical therapy appointment that Dorothy had arranged and was picking her up from. I had a window of about 2 hours. I made coffee and poured her a cup and sat across from her at the table that Carol and I had bought at an estate sale in 1998, a solid oak thing that had been in this kitchen longer than our daughter had been an adult. I want to have an honest conversation, I said. Okay, she said, already a little watchful. I spoke with Patrice. She set down her mug. She told me about the call you made to your Uncle Dennis. A long pause. I was just checking on him. You asked him about his will and whether the house was in both names. I was concerned about the family's planning. Dorothy. My voice was level. I'd learned a long time ago that the moments when you most want to raise your voice are usually the moments when you most need to keep it quiet. I was in that man's house making sure he took his blood thinners at the right time. I was there because he's my brother, and he needed someone. And while I was there, you called him and asked about his estate. She looked at the table. I also want to tell you directly, since I believe you should hear it from me rather than discover it some other way, that I've updated my own estate documents. Thomas will inherit the house. The insurance and financial accounts have been redistributed. You are not the beneficiary you were 2 weeks ago. Her head came up. Dad, this isn't punishment. It's accuracy. My documents should reflect my actual intentions and my actual understanding of who the people in my life are and what they're doing. You're taking me out of your will. I'm restructuring everything to match reality. If reality changes, The documents can change. I'm your daughter. I know you are. I'm also the person who raised you, and I know exactly what I taught you and what that teaching looked like, and somewhere between then and now something changed and I don't fully understand what it was. But what happened with Uncle Dennis? Dorothy, that wasn't a small thing. That was your father sitting with a sick man and his wife, and you using that absence to ask him about what he owned. She was crying, quietly, the way she'd always cried since she was a little girl, without making much noise. Carol used to say it was the saddest kind of crying, the kind people did when they'd learned not to make a fuss. "We're in trouble," she said finally. "Tell me, the debt is worse than what I told you. There's a personal loan. There's a tax situation from a couple of years ago, when we filed wrong, and we owe the IRS. We've been moving money around trying to cover minimums and we haven't been saving anything. We haven't saved anything in 3 years. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was ashamed, and because she stopped. Because I thought, if you knew, you'd make us leave. And I didn't know how to leave. Do you understand?" I said, after a moment, that if you had come to me 3 years ago and told me the truth, I would have sat down with you, and we would have worked through it. That I would not have thrown you out. That I've never once in your life let you face something alone, if I could help it. I know that. Then help me understand why you chose to do it this way instead. She couldn't answer that. I don't know that there is an answer. Exactly. Beyond the fact that shame makes people do stranger things than dishonesty makes them do. I'd seen it in my career. Project managers who buried cost overruns in footnotes because they couldn't face saying the number out loud. By the time the truth came out, the hole was always twice as deep as it would have been. His mother came back from physical therapy and went quietly to her room. My son-in-law came home at 4, and the 3 of us sat at the table, and I laid out what the next 60 days were going to look like. A full financial accounting, a real debt management plan, which I would help them put together once, and only once. A concrete move-out date, which we set for February 15th, giving them 4 months, not to find a house that wasn't realistic right now, but to find an apartment, something they could genuinely afford while they repaired what needed repairing. His mother was welcome to stay until she was mobile, with a departure date of January 1st. They would pay me $800 a month in the meantime, not as rent, because it wasn't rent, but because adults who consume resources contribute to those resources. My son-in-law didn't like any of it. He said I was making things harder than they needed to be. I told him that I had made things easier than they needed to be for 18 months, and that this was the correction. He went upstairs. Dorothy stayed. "I'm sorry," she said. "About Uncle Dennis. That was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it. I know. I don't know what I thought would happen. You thought he might die, and you thought about the house, and it got ahead of your better judgment. I wasn't trying to be cruel. It was just true. You've been scared, and you let the fear make decisions for you. I understand being scared. I don't understand keeping it a secret for 3 years. Are we going to be okay?" she said. "You and me." I looked at my daughter, who had her mother's jaw and my father's blue eyes, and who had sat in this kitchen every Sunday morning of her childhood eating cereal and watching whatever birds came to the feeder Carol kept on the window ledge. The feeder was still there. I still filled it. "I want us to be okay," I said. "That's different from saying we're there yet. You've got some work to do, Dorothy. Not just with the money, with yourself. I'd ask you to think seriously about talking to someone. A counselor, a financial therapist, someone who can help you figure out why this all happened instead of just fixing the numbers." "I'll think about it," she said. "Think hard." February 15th, they moved out. A 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of town, cheaper than I would have guessed, which suggested they'd actually done the work of looking. His mother had gone back to Columbus on the 3rd of January, steadier on her feet, genuinely grateful for the time, and for what I suspected was the first real stability she'd had in a while. We'd had a few good conversations over December. She was a woman who'd raised her boys mostly alone and had made the best of what she had. I didn't hold any of it against her. The Saturday after they moved out, I went through the house, room by room, the way you do after a long chapter ends. guest room back to an office. My desk back in from the garage. The wood a little dusty, but no worse for it. On top of the desk was the box where I kept Carol's letters. The ones she'd written me in the early years before email made letters feel unnecessary. I opened the box. Everything was there. I called Thomas that evening, and we talked for almost an hour, which was longer than we usually talked. "How does it feel?" he said. "Quiet," I said. "Like after a long job wraps up. You're tired, but you know you did the work right. Are you going to reach back out to Dorothy?" "Not yet. She knows where I am. When she's ready to show me something has changed, she knows the door." I went to my brother's at Christmas. Patrice made her grandmother's sweet potato pie, and Dennis and I sat on the porch after dinner and watched the neighborhood lights the way we'd done as kids from our parents' porch 40 years ago and 3 states away. He didn't bring up the phone call. I didn't either. Some things don't need to be picked back open. 4 months later, in the spring, I got a handwritten letter. Handwriting I knew as well as my own. "Dad," it started, and I could tell she'd rewritten the first line at least once from the slight indentation of a crossed-out word. "I've been seeing a therapist since March. Her name is Dr. Hartley, and she's been helping me understand some things about myself that I should have understood a long time ago. I'm not ready to explain all of it yet, but I want you to know I'm doing the work. I also want you to know that the debt is being handled. We sat down with a credit counselor in February, and we have a real plan now. We're on track. I have a spreadsheet. I know that would make you laugh, but it's true. I'm not writing to ask for anything. I know you'll wonder about that. I'm writing because Dr. Hartley asked me to write to one person I'd hurt, and say so without asking for anything in return. You were the first name I thought of. I love you, Dad. I'm sorry. Not because of the estate, though I understand why you did what you did, and I think you were right, but because of Uncle Dennis, and because of 18 months of taking without asking, and because Mom raised me better than that and somewhere I forgot. I'm trying to remember. Love, Dorothy." I folded the letter and put it in the box with Carol's. I sat on the back porch for a while with my coffee, looking at the yard. The maple Carol planted the spring Dorothy was born had gotten enormous. It threw shade halfway across the lawn on mornings like this one. Carol had picked it out of a catalog, and I'd been skeptical. Seemed like a lot of tree for the space. She'd been right, as usual. It was a magnificent tree. I thought about writing back. I thought about calling. I decided to wait a few more weeks, give the letter time to mean what it meant without me rushing to answer it and collapsing the distance before it had done its work. Some things need to settle before you can build on them. That was true of soil, true of concrete, true of the relationships that matter enough to repair properly. You don't rush the curing. You give it time and pressure, and you check it, and you let the structure tell you when it's ready. Carol used to say that love was mostly patience, dressed up to look like other things. I hadn't understood that fully until she wasn't here to demonstrate it anymore. I was learning.